Welcome back to another great episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Demons, or most of you know it as the City of Angels, Hollyweird, downtown LA, all the such. Anyhow, we are broadcasting from our home base, 107.7 FM, New Orleans, Louisiana, as well as Deprogrammed Radio in the UK, plus all the other wonderful networks carrying us, including iHeartMedia. Now, today, we're going to go dive deep into the paranormal. For those of you who live in West Virginia, you're really going to be in for a treat because our guest today really knows not just UFOs, not just ghosts, but a whole host of other stories out there. As a matter of fact, he got to fill in something for me that I've been wondering for a long time. So without further ado, I've given you enough time to go ahead and look him up on our website and everywhere else we promoted the show. I might as well introduce him to you. Mr. Dave Spinks. Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on, man.
It's a pleasure. The true pleasure is all mine. Now, I'm going to save that story for what you told me before we got on air because I think it's valuable enough for everybody to hear it, especially from a perspective of you actually speaking to the eyewitnesses. Now, I'm going to turn the clock back a little bit to your own personal experience that got you into the paranormal field, that left the job that you were doing for the federal government into chase this, into figuring out what the heck is going on under this. And you agree with me that the umbrella term paranormal covers everything of UFO, Bigfoot, abductions, Loch Ness, you name it. And that's what I like about you.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's interconnected. So
what was it that happened when you were young that got you going into this?
Well, what happened to me, what really got me started into wanting answers in the paranormal fields, so to speak, was me and my grandfather were on one of our regular fishing trips here in West Virginia on the Gauley River. And after having caught a bunch of fish and eaten, and, we were going to camp out for the weekend there, about 30 minutes or so before dark, there was a huge splash out in the middle of the river. I mean, a massive splash. And the water rained down from it. The splash was so big. We didn't see what caused the splash, but we jumped up and we were looking around. There was no other people around. We were out there by ourselves. And on the other side of the river, it was straight up and down pretty much, a very vertical area where people would not be. Mm-hmm. It was just too rough of terrain. Well, we looked around, couldn't figure out where the splash came from, so we kind of relaxed again and sat back down on our chair. And that's when I heard something come up through the trees. You know when you hear something hitting the tree branches, what it sounds like, but this was much louder and more pronounced. And I look out to my left, out of the corner of my eye, and I see a massive rock coming in an upwards direction, going through the tree limbs on the other side of the river. And then it comes out and splashes into the river. And I knew right then and there that's what did the first one, So me and my grandpa jumped up. We're looking around, what the heck, and my grandpa yells out, across the river. He's thinking it's people, and he yells out, you heathens, knock it off over there and whatnot. And I look back, and he's running for the tent. So I know what he's going to get. He's going to get the shotgun. Mm-hmm. In his mind, he's thinking there's people over there messing with us, So he comes back and hollers out, again, you heathens, knock it off, or I'll shoot. And about that time, you hear this god-awful howl come out of the woods over there, and it just echoed down through the canyon, sent, cold chills up and down your spine from your head to your feet. And we start seeing the trees and stuff over there shake. And these are big trees, 50, 60-foot trees that are shaking just back and forth while this thing is letting out these god-awful roars and screams and everything else. Well, he yells at me, get to the truck, boy. So I run over to the truck, and I'm kind of cowering down, peeking around the side. And my grandpa lets off a couple shots, and that thing roars out again, Now, even if he would have hit it from that distance with a shotgun, an old squirrel gun, it wouldn't even have hurt it. It would have peppered it or whatever. But that's when you could track this thing. You could see it going up and away from us. as the trees shook. You know, you could watch its path it was creating through the woods. And then that's when I got my first glimpse at it. It was a very large, hairy creature, covered in hair, dark brownish, almost black hair. And it was rip-roaring, tearing the woods down, man, as it screamed and yelled going up and away from us. And it scared the hell out of me, you know. And my grandpa comes running, grabs me with one arm in the truck, and throws me from the driver's side all the way through the truck to the passenger side. The only thing that stopped me was I hit the passenger side door. He jumps in the truck, and he said, "We're getting out of here, son. That's not of God." Now, my grandfather was a Baptist minister for 40 years, and it scared him to death, too. He peels out of there. I've got my head buried in my hands thinking we're going to die because the truck is bottoming out in every pothole. You know, this is a rough area, and it's a good 4 or 5 miles in and out of the woods there. And it's a very rough, rugged dirt road to get down into that area back in those days anyway. And, you know, I'm thinking the truck's going to fall apart here, and this thing's going to kill us. It's going to get us, it's going to get to us and kill us. Well, we got out of there finally. We drove around for quite a while. My grandfather never said anything, you know, and then he finally pulled over and he looked at me and said, "Son, we better not tell anyone about this because people are going to think we're crazy." And, you know, he didn't want his parishioners thinking that he was on drugs or drinking or something like that if, you know, he's a minister. And we left all of our camping gear there and everything, you know, and I guess he sent my uncle back to get it later, but it really, you know, it terrified me. I didn't go in the woods for several years after that, but then I started as I got a little older, and I had another experience with my other grandfather, paranormal-wise. I started wanting answers as to what it was I saw, you know, and
of course,
and back in those days, we didn't have the luxury of the internet. I've not, you know, at that age, I was 13. I never heard of Bigfoot. I didn't know of the Patterson-Gimlin film. I didn't know anything about this stuff. And as I started going to the local libraries, I'd come across magazine articles and newspaper articles and stuff that other people had seen a very similar thing all over the world.
That's right.
People were these things. You know, I came across the Yeti accounts and the foot tracks in the Himalayas, and I started coming across more and more stuff. And then I finally one day, you know, saw the show In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy, and bam, everything started clicking. I was like, hey, there's something to all this stuff. And I just, you know, it just went on and on over the years. And, you know, I started actually doing my own EVP work because I saw a guy named Hans Holzer on In Search Of, and I had a recorder exactly like his. And when we go on family outings to different cool locations, I'd bring my recorder, and I started capturing EVPs, and I was hooked from then on out. And it's just been a hobby of mine that's gone insane over these many 30 years now.
This is a great, first of all, there's a multi-facets to the story that I actually have a couple questions for. First of all, you mentioned what you saw. First, you described it as a giant rock until you actually got a look at this giant hairy beast, and you had never seen anything of it before. Now, in your region, is it called Bigfoot or Sasquatch, and what's the difference between the area?
It goes by many different names in our area, and it's almost locally. It has different names. Different counties have different names for it. It's called the Blue Devil. It's called a Woolly Booger. It's called Bigfoot. People don't really use Sasquatch around here, but now that it's more known and more out in the public, they do use Sasquatch now. You know, there's different local names for it. And there are, you know, over the years of doing this, I have collected literally hundreds of accounts from locals, you know, people that will not talk to outsiders about this. And even to this day, like, if you're not local, even I'm a native West Virginia, I could go one county over and people would be very skeptical to even tell me because to them I'm an outsider. You know, that's how shut down and ruled the area is. But, you know, most of the time, you know, the word of mouth gets around and, you know, somebody's cousin knows my friend or whatever the case, and they say, well, I know a guy that does that. And a lot of times people just want to share their story. They want to know, they want answers just like I did when I was a young boy, and they want to share what they saw, and they want to tell it to someone who won't label them as crazy. And I've got hundreds and hundreds of counts now from local West Virginians and people that have traveled through West Virginia that have had a sighting or an encounter with a strange unknown creature, such as Bigfoot. And I've compiled these over the years, and now I'm putting them into books after encouragement from some of my friends that are writers and stuff. So, it's very compelling to me. Like in my new West Virginia Bigfoot book, I've got an account where 5 state troopers had an encounter, and when you have that sort of person who is very, who are very well respected in the communities, have something to lose by telling that story. It's very compelling. These guys were so freaked out that they drew their guns, all 5 of them.
I wouldn't blame them, but at the same time, I don't think a bullet would even knock it down, would it? Even if they unloaded. I don't know, man. I
mean, I don't adhere to the fact of shooting a Bigfoot, and I would only shoot a creature if it was attacking me, and I had to defend myself, because we don't know what these things are yet. No one knows. There's no body.
That's right.
There's no known physical hard proof DNA. I'm sure there is, but I believe there's a cover up to some extent to it as well. And we don't know if they're aliens, interdimensional creatures, the missing link between man and ape. We just don't know yet until that hard proof comes out.
Now, this is something that I told you right before we came on air, is that I once heard the fact that these are telepathic, just like many of the extraterrestrial beings that visit us. And the reason is because they're so elusive from us. I mean, how can so many people, especially now where you can go anywhere and there's a camera on you wherever you go, and yet you can't capture this?
Well, I think that's some of that's a misconception, man, because where I live, it's very, very rural. There's very few people. I live on top of a mountain surrounded by millions of acres of wilderness. And that's the truth. Most of your reports of Bigfoot and Sasquatch type creatures are more likely to be in rural areas. Now, with the fact of the deforestation that's going on and the logging and the timbering everywhere, there are more and more sightings coming out and reports of encounters from loggers and people running gas lines all over the country. Most of your reports that I've seen come from rural areas and wilderness type areas. There are a few in suburban areas, but the bulk and the majority are in very remote areas across the country.
I would actually agree with you there. To tell you the truth, correct me if I'm wrong, me, myself, investigating this for years, I've never actually heard of a Bigfoot coming in a suburban area. I mean, that's just what I've observed. Have you come across at least a single case that has happened?
There's been a few that I can't remember exactly where they were off the top of my head, but they weren't so much in actual huge suburban area, but in the outskirts where there's, quite a few houses, not just out in the country, so to speak. There are a few where people have reported seeing them. I have an account in my book from a young man who lives in a suburban area here in West Virginia, but his backyard is woodsy. Okay. Mm-hmm. And he reported seeing a juvenile Bigfoot when he was just a young boy. And his account is in my book as well. And he lives pretty much in a neighborhood where there's, 40, 50 houses in the area right next to each other. But his backyard is attached to, I believe it's a state forest. So,
You mentioned juvenile Bigfoot. How tall are we talking as far as juvenile?
If I remember off the top of my head, it was, I think he said it was 4 to 5 feet tall.
Wow.
In that range.
Even as a juvenile, they're that pretty damn big.
Yeah, but if you look at all the accounts, most reports of Bigfoots are a minimum of 6 foot and taller.
Yes. Yes. Few hundred pounds. Yeah. Pure muscle.
Pure muscle. Several hundred, up to several hundred pounds. Like the one I saw, I saw it across the river, and it was like 2 of my grandpa wide. And my grandpa was a big man. He was 6'5", 250 easy.
Wow.
it dwarfed him. And I, we knew it could kill us with no problem. My grandfather was in the second wave. He stormed the beaches of Normandy. This guy was not afraid of anything. And I saw the terror in his eyes when he picked me up and tossed me in the truck, and just that alone scared me even more.
I would think so, because like you said, if he was one of those people who landed in Normandy on that fateful day of June 6, 1944, I mean, I can't imagine the people that survived and came back and were able to be productive citizens. In your case, your grandfather was a Baptist minister. A lot of people had shell shock. They never recovered from the blood and guts they saw of their friends being blown to bits and fired.
He was a medic, so you can imagine what he dealt with.
Even worse, because he had to go in the line of fire to each and every person and determine who's going to live, as opposed to who's dying and just give him the shot of morphine. Unbelievable.
He never, ever talked about the war. He would not talk about it, ever.
Yeah, that's actually, I find that, and now a lot of people that were World War II veterans are disappearing, and you get that sense of those who were given the Medal of Honor. It's to them, it's the worst day of their life, and yet they're given an award. And they're told to talk about it, and of course they don't want to talk about it because it just brings back all the memories and emotions. I couldn't even imagine going there. So, more power to your grandfather.
A lot of them have survivor's guilt and whatnot, because all their buddies were killed. Most of the guys in the first wave were dead. They all got killed, almost every one of them.
Yeah, so, coming off the boats, literally, and the Nazi machine guns were right on top of them.
Yep. So, when you have a guy like that, and and you have an experience with him like that, and I'll tell you a funny side story that goes along with that whole story of what me and him encountered that day. Well, we kind of made a pact not to talk about it because we didn't want folks to think we were crazy, and I never talked about it. And here I find out when he died, I said, doing what I do, I'm going to go ahead and. A lot of folks ask me what started me in the paranormal, and I would always tell them about another story until my grandfather died, and then I said I got to tell that story, because it's really what started me in the paranormal. But I made a promise to him, and I kept it. Well, when I go to tell my uncle that, hey, look, I'm going to start talking about this story that happened to me and Grandpa because it's really what started me in the paranormal, and I'm putting it in my new book, And he goes, oh, you're talking about that time you and Papa saw that monkey man down on the river? And I'm like, what?
So he heard of it.
I said, wait a minute. He told you? He said, yeah, he came to me like 25 years ago and said, Stanton, I got to tell someone else this because if something happens to me, I want people to know in the family what me and David saw that day. And I was like, you mean to tell me I kept that secret all these years? And then, when he died, that's when I decided I was going to go ahead and tell the story. And he said, yeah, he told me. And then I find out from him and he had a weird encounter with some of his friends in this old moonshiner's cave very near the same area. Mm-hmm. And then so did one of our other uncles that was on my grandma's side. He was cutting firewood, and he told Stanton, my uncle, that he saw one down there too in the 70s.
Another Bigfoot incident in the Moonshiner's Cave?
Yeah. Wow. Yep. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, there's all kinds of accounts around here, man. This place is a perfect place for a creature. If it's a living, breathing creature and it has to survive with food and water and shelter just like we do, this place is, West Virginia is pretty much, I call it the Pacific Northwest of the East Coast because it's littered with caves. It's littered with food. I mean, there's every kind of food you can imagine for a creature such as Bigfoot, and plenty of food and water and shelter here. And it's very, very rural. I live right on the Monongahela National Forest, and the bulk of Bigfoot encounters and sightings come from that area. It's a huge expanse of federal land that's a federal park. So, I mean, that's where they take all the problem bears in the state and they put them. So it's that big.
You were saying that prior to telling this account with your grandfather, that you were telling about another experience you had that way, that you didn't want to violate that promise with your grandfather. What was the other account that you were telling that happened after that?
Yeah, oddly enough, it was with my other grandfather, my mom's dad. When I was around 16 years old, and my other grandfather was a World War II vet here as well. Around here in West Virginia, we have more per capita military members than any other state, just for a little tidbit of information. But everybody around here pretty much is someone in their family or their whole family has served in the military, all going back to the Revolutionary War. But
Patriots, real patriots.
Yeah. So my other grandfather, my mom's dad, was very sick veteran. He had gotten emphysema, or he got pneumonia over in Iceland during the war, and he had almost all of his lungs cut out. He only had like a quarter of one lung left, and he had to have a trach, where they stick it in your throat with an oxygen tank.
Yes.
And he smoked like a freight train. He smoked old Camel non-filter cigarettes, right?
Yeah.
So, and he was so hardcore, he didn't care. He would smoke in his trach hole.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, Graham, everyone's like, Papa, you got to stop doing that stuff. I got to die sometime, that kind of thing. But, so, he was always sickly and stuff, and I was down at my dad's house, which was 30 miles away, for the summer visiting him, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and I for no reason at all, and I sat straight up in the bed, and there's my mom's dad standing at the foot of the bed. There's no way he should have been there in the middle of the night, number one. Number two, he had no reason to be at my dad's house ever, My mom and dad had been divorced since I was like 2 years old, so, and I'm looking at him, and I kind of do the old double take, and he looks really good. Like, his color looks good, and I noticed for a split second he doesn't have the oxygen tube. And I said, "What are you doing here, Papa?" And he just smiled at me and poof, disappeared in front of my eyes. And I'm like, wow, that was a freaky dream. And I kind of went back to sleep, So the next day I woke up and this dream was on my mind. I'm using quotation marks, dream right now. Okay.
Yes.
So I called up to my grandma's house because I'm worried about him now, because I had this really vivid dream. It was in color and everything. And my uncle from out of state answers the phone, and I say, "What are you doing there?" And he's like, "No one called you yet, Dave?" And I said, "No, why?" He said, "Well, your grandpa died last night. We're coming in for the funeral." And I'm kind of sitting there. I'm sitting there with my mouth dropped open, going, "What the heck?" And I never said anything to anyone about the dream. And it was like 6 months later, we were up at Grandma's eating dinner, a bunch of us, spending time with her. And I'm thinking to myself the whole time while I'm eating dinner, I said, I'm going to come out and tell everybody. I'm going to tell them. They're going to think I'm nuts, but I'm going to tell them. And I come out and tell everyone about the experience I had. And I noticed right away several people in the family's faces went funny looking. And the whole room just erupted. I had the same dream. I had the same dream. Everybody's going nuts saying they had the same experience the night he died. So I knew right then and there he had come to say goodbye before he went to wherever he was. Yeah, almost everyone in the immediate family had the same experience, and no one talked about it until I brought it up. And ever since those things happened to me as a young man, I've been, pursuing answers to some of these questions. Some of man's greatest questions to me are what happens when we die? Are there unknown creatures walking among us? And are we alone in the universe? I mean, those are three of man's greatest questions that have never been answered, yet, as a so it all depends on religiously what your background and your belief system is. Some people know in their heart that they're going to die and go to heaven. I mean, that's just their belief system, and that's fine. It is what it is. But will we ever find out answers to those questions? I don't know, but to me it's fascinating to try, and it's fascinating to do what I do.
And heaven for some people could literally be just another dimension. It's like your soul leaves from this plane and goes into another one. And I think it's just fascinating that your grandfather literally came to say goodbye, not just to you, but to your entire family, all the immediate family members. 6 months, really. No one spoke about it till you said something, huh?
No. No, because everybody was upset, and I guess, and they came in from out of the state and everything, and did the funeral and all that, and then everybody went back to their normal thing. And then, we came back in this next summer, during the summer, to spend time with Grandma. We usually, we used to have family gatherings and whatnot, and then boom, I came out and told them, and then the whole room just erupted, and several of the other family members all had the same experience, and it was pretty fascinating and eye-opening. You say, wow, that is just that's crazy,
Now, let me ask this of you. You said you started using an EVP and carrying that with you everywhere you went. And I always find this fascinating. So there's two questions I ask of anybody that records EVPs, electronic voice phenomenon, of the other side. First of all, before I get to hear some of the greatest ones you've heard, is the two I ask is, one, have you ever caught a dead language, a language that was spoken maybe thousands of years ago that is no longer spoken, that was caught on an EVP?
Yeah, there's been a few times where I've actually got Latin.
Interesting.
I had it verified as Latin, but nothing else per se. Like nothing that I could verify as like being Aramaic or something like that.
Sumerian or something like that, but still Latin is hundreds of years old. I've
got plenty of other languages. Like I've got Spanish EVPs, I've got Italian EVPs. So and I even got various English EVPs with a Southern accent or a Maine accent or whatever, that part of the country, which was very interesting too.
Now, here's the other question. This is less about EVPs and about ghosts in general. I've always wondered, if anybody that you've investigated, have they ever come across a ghost of an extraterrestrial?
Not that I know of. I haven't.
No, that's the same. I get the same answer whenever I ask that, and I'm just wondering why. Because clearly they died here from crashes and retrievals, or some that have been held in custody from sometimes crashes and retrievals. So I would have thought, unless they're soulless, which some people say the graves are, but that's a whole different story.
That's a whole genre, yeah.
Now,
well, I'll give you an interesting take on that. Okay, you know how there's all these accounts of Bigfoots walking around, and then people claim they just disappear in front of their face, or they walk behind some bushes and then they follow the trackway, and the trackway stops and there's no Bigfoot to be seen. Is that a ghost of a Bigfoot that they just saw?
Very, very interesting. That's a good way to put it. And that also reminds me of David Paulides, who does the Missing 411. He started with Bigfoot, and then of course it started leading into people that disappeared literally in front of people, like say two parents were walking and a child behind them, and they turned their back to see where their kid is, and just in a snap of a finger gone without sight. It begs the question, did they slip into another dimension where they plucked out of from the ground into the sky into a craft? The possibilities are endless. That's the hard part, is to confirm what it really is. But you gave a very interesting answer about the Bigfoot, that what it is, if people are in fact seeing the ghost of Bigfoot, one, it just disappears. Now,
right. Is it the ghost of an extinct giant ape, or the missing, or some type of Neanderthal that no one has ever identified yet? We don't know. I mean, there's so many ways you can run with it up until this point. Like I said, if you don't have a body and proof of what it is, then we have to think outside the box and see what happens.
Now, this is one thing I really like about West Virginia, is you have a lot of the more famous stories that happen there. First of all, you have the two accounts of Bigfoot, and of course these EVPs that you've recorded, ghosts, I'm sure that we could talk about in a second. But Flatwoods Monster, Mothman, these are West Virginia. This isn't New York. This isn't Florida. This isn't Nevada. Do you think, or have your investigations ever uncovered why it's such a hot spot for specifically those two, Mothman and, of course, the Flatwoods Monster? Because I've never heard of any of those types of cases anywhere else in the U.S., let alone the world.
Well, Mothman, a creature similar to Mothman has literally been spotted all over the world for many hundreds of years. it's said to be the bringer of bad news, or the harbinger of of a bad omen to come. Something tragic is going to happen when the Mothman,
like the bridge, right? The bridge collapse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. This type of creature, flying humanoid type creature, has been seen literally all over the world, and in a lot of cases, some natural disaster happens when this thing is spotted. So, is it the bringer of bad news? Is it some kind of omen? We don't know, but it seems to lend itself in many cases to that fact exactly. There's reports of the Mothman type creature being seen before the Japanese earthquake and the huge tidal wave over in was it Sumatra that happened, and all these different things. But West Virginia in general, going back to your question, is literally a hotbed of all kinds of paranormal activity. I think that the magnetical forces that are in play here, under the ground with the mountains here in West Virginia, and another thing that people don't really take into account is literally the whole state is just filled with just ungodly amounts of tunnels and
caves,
mines, coal mines. They've dug literally under every inch of this state. And who knows what they may have released during those. We're talking back to the 1800s here. Just trillions of tons of coal have been excavated out of this state, and you've got a lot of ancient burial sites going back to the mound builders here that date thousands of years old, with these giant skeletons have been found all over the state, these giant mounds. The mound builder culture was here, and I think a lot of that stuff is intertwined with the paranormal activity. And having investigated the paranormal for so many years, we're finding more and more that these Native American sites seem to tie in with a lot of the paranormal activity, whether it's UFO sightings, strange cryptids, and hauntings. It's all tied in together, and in a lot of these cases, these locations and these structures and whatnot, and even these whole city areas have direct ties to Native Americans.
And they had a far more open mind. And if you recall, right before we were talking, before we came on the show, I was telling you here in California about in Yosemite, or where we have these beings that were captured on security camera that are just, it could be described as walking legs. I believe there's just a head and walking legs. And the American Indians have statues of these beings and throughout the area. So obviously they seem to have been more perceptive and open. Not to mention when they talk about being given wisdom from those above. And it seemed to me that they respected the other side or all of the paranormal more than we as a culture today, or even in the last couple hundred years, have done so.
Oh yeah, because that's the Native Americans' history is passed down orally. There's no written history. It's generation to generation orally, and we have been, we'll just say European Christians, okay, have been brainwashed to believe in one way and one way only, because for whatever reason, I think a lot of it is for scare tactics and for saying, hey, you got to believe this way or you're going to hell, and that's it. No, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. If you don't do it like this, you're done. And that is, what kind of terror to put into people's minds, to just scare the bejesus out of them, to implant that in, from the time you're a little kid, and it is what it is. But Native Americans as a whole are very open to the spirit world. That's what they do, and that's how they believe. And many of the tribes say that they come from star people.
That's right.
And and they also, they believe in elementals, guardians of the forests and the land and the sky and everything else. And there's a lot of truth backed up in what they say, in my opinion.
I agree. I definitely agree, and especially when you have so many different tribes talking about the same thing. I mean, they all can't
Yep.
be hallucinating on
And
peyote or whatever it is they're doing.
it's,
And for hundreds of years, if not
and
a
it's not just
thousand
here in the
plus.
U.S. It's around the world. It's not just in the U.S. It's cultures from around the world, and a lot of these things match up. You know.
Now, let me ask you to sort of tell the story that you told me, which has always interested me, the Flatwoods Monster, which is also that I've only heard happen from in West Virginia.
Well, the Flatwoods Monster is a famous ufology case. I mean, it was literally almost, essentially, in a sense, lost to time, and I think there's several reasons for that. If you're into ufology and you follow UFOs and the whole, it started at Roswell. I believe it started way before that.
That's
But
right. Yeah. Dropa Stones, China, I mean, that's thousands of years. And even if you just go like to 60 years, 50 years before Roswell, you have the 1896 Aurora, Texas crash.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so the Flatwoods Monster story really takes place during the mass UFO wave in 1952, all over the East Coast, really all over the United States, but primarily over the East Coast. There was, if you follow the History Channel, they got the new show Project Blue Book on, which it's Hollywood-fied big time, but it tells some of the stories that took place during Project Blue Book. And the Flatwoods Monster was actually told on an episode.
Yeah, the problem is they try to play it off as an owl, if I'm not mistaken, that episode.
Right. Well, that's essentially, another government cover-up. But
True.
But anyway, there was a mass UFO wave going on during the 50s, 52 especially, over D.C., East Coast. The Air Force pilots were ordered to chase these things down and shoot them down if necessary, because we were in the middle of the Cold War. They didn't know if it was Russian technology. They didn't, they had to try to find out what was invading our airspace. And for unknown craft to be flying over our White House and D.C. was, they couldn't have that. Just couldn't have it.
That just goes right after World War II, to be unprotected of your airspace in the capital. I would think that really would have scared a lot of people, saying, okay, hold on a second. We got to take this very seriously.
Absolutely. And, we had used the atomic bomb now. They were developing stronger and more powerful nuclear weapons. They were, there was the whole crisis, the nuclear crisis going on, the arms race between us and the Russians. It was just a very high tension time for military people and really the safety of the world. And, you have these unknown crafts flying in, which makes sense because a lot of people think, okay, these extraterrestrials are studying us. They don't want us, they don't want us to have atomic weapons and nuclear weapons because we're going to destroy ourselves or whatever, so it all falls in line. But anyway, going back to the actual incident, September 12, 1952, some young kids were playing football in Flatwoods, West Virginia at the grade school. And they all observed, I think there's between 8 and 12 of them off the top of my head. They observed a fireball come in overhead. Only this fireball seemed to slow down, change directions, and land in the field of the Fisher farm that was directly up on the hill. The boys lived very near there, so they all ran to their house, to their mom, back home, got their mom, told the mom, hey, we just saw this, and they're all excited, as young kids would be. And another family member was there who happened to be 19, and he was actually in the National Guard. So they all grabbed flashlights and proceeded up the hill on the Fisher farm to try to find out what they had saw. Well, as they got closer, they started coming into contact with this sulfuric, like acidy, smoky concoction that was all over the area. And it was burning their eyes, making them choke and gag. And later on in interviews, 2 of the boys said they had looked over the right down a little, there was a little slump into the hill, and it kind of like a holler, as we call it here. And they said they saw a craft sitting down over the hill there. And they had flashlights, and they were looking around. It was dark by the time they got up there. And one of the boys had heard a noise, and he shined his light in the direction, and under a giant oak tree, there stood a 10 to 12 foot tall being with glowing eyes, and it scared the crap out of them all. Of course, they screamed and they took off running back down the hill. And one of the May boys said that his mom actually cleared a 6 to 8 foot cattle gate with one leap. That's how scared they were. And over the coming days, they were interviewed by numerous people, to include like Ray Barker and several other well-known authors.
Jalen Hynek too. Yeah, he was there.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of people there interviewing these kids, and their stories matched up. They interviewed them separately, had them draw pictures, and the pictures were all matched up almost perfectly. So they knew the kids were telling the truth as to what they saw. They just didn't know what it was they saw. And during the same time that the kids were witnessing this thing, what people didn't know was there was actually a Special Forces National Guard unit out of West Virginia that was activated and sent to the area, which tells me that the Pentagon was tracking these objects and already had sent a crack team of military guys to find out what happened, where this thing went down at. And then they had split the team into two teams. It was a Captain Levitt, who was, when he gave this interview, he was a retired colonel. He'd been in the Korean War and Vietnam and everything else. And he was in charge of the Special Forces National Guard unit here. And he said that he was ordered to, collect any samples he could and retrieve any aircraft that may have crashed in the area. And he was given very limited data, according to him, in an interview he did in Frashino's book. According to his interview, he collected some oily substance and then post haste back to the Pentagon and never heard anything back. And in his older years, during his interview he said there was no doubt in his mind that there was a cover-up of some sort going on. So,
just as you mentioned, when the pilots were ordered to shoot them down, a lot of pilots actually died trying to chase these craft. So
yeah, they did, and that's a whole nother government cover-up as well. Many of these pilots died, and they just said, "Oh, he died in a training accident," or whatever. And it's hard to tell actually how many pilots may have died chasing these things.
Yeah, they won't tell you. That's for darn sure. That's the last thing they're going to say is, by the way, he was ordered to chase this craft that was unknown, and he lost oxygen and just crashed. No, of course they're going to blame it on pilot error or mechanics on the airplane or some maintenance or something like that. It's always the typical government, the United States BS, as I like to call it, that goes around. Now, you mentioned sulfur, the smell of sulfur with the Flatwoods Monster.
Yeah.
The first thing that pops in my mind is all those people that go out from, say, ghost hunters, ghost adventurers, and people like yourself, and sometimes where they encounter someone who's possessed by demons, a demonic possession. A lot of them say that they smell like sulfur. Have you come across many accounts, and do you know why sulfur is the substance of choice for them to say that's what it smells like?
Well, I've actually come across that a few times myself during investigations, where you get this overwhelming smell of just sulfur, especially in some of these negative locations I've been. I've also come across the smell of rotting flesh numerous times. I mean, just the most putrid smells you can imagine. And, I guess, I don't use the term demon just like a lot of these TV shows and stuff. I think true demonic hauntings and infestations are very few and far between, even though there's been a steep rise in those in the last several years. One could say that when there's maybe a possibly demonic entity in the area trying to manifest or having manifested, will put off those type of smells. Depending what your background is and your belief system.
That's actually, I'm glad you mentioned that you don't use the word demon, because a lot of people turn their way to that and just say, okay, now you're talking theology to me. And you're absolutely right about the rise in them, because one of the guests that I've had on, Father Jack Ashcraft, who of course he's a priest, said that the Vatican was in fact trained more in exorcisms because of the rise in them.
Yeah, you're right, they are.
But I think a lot of them might be confusing what they are seeing for something else, maybe a non-terrestrial being, or what if it's just ghosts? It's basically up there.
There's some crossover there, because there are some that believe that these ETs are projecting themselves to manifest like what we would call a traditional demonic-looking character out of the Christian Bible, or possibly what a jinn would look like, in our minds, or what we would think, what those creatures or entities are depicted as looking like in these various manuscripts. Some people believe that ETs are implanting these images into people's minds. So that's a whole nother thing. And if you look at some of the descriptions of the Greys and whatnot, they got the large, dark, black eyes, and a lot of that crosses over into descriptions of demonic type characters.
That's right. That's right. And I would think that throughout the centuries, not decades, centuries, that when they came across, say, dwarves or fairies or elves or gremlins or demons, they were in fact coming across extraterrestrials. They just described them with the terms they had, especially the times where the church was a reigning power, unlike today. I mean, a couple hundred years ago, or few hundred years ago, like in Massachusetts, you'd be burned at the stake if they even thought you were a witch, and it might not even have been you a witch. It might have been a non-terrestrial being or a UFO incident or a ghost, and next thing you know, you're
at the stake for just talking. Like, we'd be burning at the stake for just talking about what we're talking about now.
Yeah. Thankfully, we're not. Thankfully, we're actually at a time where we can. And this is something else you also mentioned before the interview, is that even within this field, a couple decades ago, you could not say Bigfoot and UFO in the same sentence without being laughed your ass half out of the room. But now you can talk about it.
Well, because like we talked about before the show, there's so many accounts that are coming out of. For instance, a person seeing a Bigfoot, and then they see a UFO or strange lights in the sky, or vice versa. They see strange lights in the sky, and then they have an encounter with a creature such as Bigfoot. So you as an investigator, you have to take all of this into consideration. What's going on here? Are these some type of guardians the ETs are dropping off? Are these actually ETs themselves, these Bigfoots and these type of creatures? What are these things? Because there's a lot of accounts out there where people are seeing both things at the same time. Strange lights in the sky, Bigfoot, strange lights in the sky. So you have to, you got to look out. You got to look outside looking in and take everything into account as an investigator. And there's a lot of reports out there like that. You can't just dismiss them all.
No, you can't, because if you do, you're just excluding a big piece of the puzzle that could give you a lot of answers. Real quick, let me get to some of these questions, Dave, if you don't mind me stopping for a quick second. Let me go back.
Yeah, go ahead.
Desert Rex, and this was when we were talking about the Flatwoods Monster. He says, did he ever think it might be ours, meaning our own, thinking that we had technology like that in 1952?
Well, that's a good question. And here's some information I can. If you think about this, and you can look it up. Okay. From the time the Roswell incident happened, we were flying prop jobs around. And from the time Roswell happened, we actually advanced 100 years in technology basically overnight.
It's true.
Now, And that's not a joke. I mean, all of a sudden we had night vision being developed. We had they had fiber optic cable being developed, lasers being developed, and that all happened shortly after the Roswell incident. You know, and in any kind of government or any kind of military, if the enemy or someone different than you has some type of technology that you don't have and it's better than yours, guess what you're going to do? You're going to reverse engineer that and use it for yourselves. That's a no-brainer, common sense thing.
Absolutely.
You know, if you go back to you know, say Napoleon times and they had better cannons than you and you happen to capture some of their cannons, guess what? You're going to take those cannons and use them against them.
Same thing in World War II. That's what we were doing. We would capture Nazi equipment.
Right, exactly. It's the same thing. I mean, that's a no-brainer. That's what any military would do. So, you know, we went from prop jobs basically overnight to the SR-71 in aircraft. Now, the SR-71 is old technology now, but you know they were developing that plane in the 50s, right after Roswell.
That's right.
This thing had flexible skin. It could fly higher and faster than anything ever known to man. And shortly after that, guess what? Stealth technology was in the pipe and being developed all over the military.
The B-2, the F-117, and this is another huge thing. If this is what is known, then that begs the question: can you imagine what they've been working on that they have not shown us yet?
Well, yeah. I mean, I was in the Air Force for 8 years. One of my jobs was walking around all known aircraft with an M16 that we have. So I've seen stuff in the sky around military bases I can't explain, and I don't think was ours, but it could be ours. We don't know. You know, UFO simply means unidentified flying object. That doesn't mean it's a little green man flying around in a craft. I'm sure there's a lot of top secret technology out there that is ours, that we have developed. You know, lately all over the country, for several years, there's been all kinds of these strange booms, but no aircraft in sight anywhere to be seen. There's claims that we have developed some kind of cloaking technology on some of our aircraft now. So, you know, who knows what we have? It's all fascinating and all interesting, but it all seemed to flick a switch since the Roswell incident, where we supposedly, you know, came across downed alien aircraft, and we sent them to Wright Pat, and they were reverse engineering them ever since then. So, and there's numerous other crashes, not just the Roswell too. So, you know, who knows what we have? You know, it's pretty fascinating, and that may be one of the reasons that the lid is kept so tightly on us being visited by creatures from another world. You know, to me that would be a prime example of one of the reasons why there's no disclosure as of yet.
For the technology, I would imagine. Yeah, if there's commercial applications to make money, or better yet, if there's military applications for defense, well, you bet your ass off they're going to cover it up and make sure that you don't get your hands on that.
Absolutely. Because, well, just imagine the outcry from other world governments if they knew for a fact if we had downed alien technology and we were using it for our military. They'd be crying foul that we had no right to, you know, hide that from the rest of the world and the whole 9 yards. Not to mention, you know, if you go to the fact that it would create mass chaos, it would in some sense, in my opinion, because people's religious belief systems would be thrown out the door, and people would, you know, some people would absolutely go nuts. I don't think it would be as bad as they let on it would be, but I do think there would be, for quite some time, there would be some chaos going around, you know, worldwide. Because people can't deal with the unknown. They're scared to death of it. And if reality hits them right in the face, and, you know, it's a known fact that, hey, we're not the only intelligent beings in the universe, there's going to be some people that freak out.
Yeah. Oh, it'll change religions, politics, economies worldwide. And I think a lot of people look at the Orwin Welles' the War of the Worlds broadcast, the radio broadcast, and that the people who tuned in late, that thought it was actually happening.
Oh yeah, they freaked out, man. People were freaking out.
Go on.
You know, you got to remember too, that was during the Cold War. You know, I mean, that was a really high tense time for everyone, and people were scared to death of,
nuclear
Nazis
annihilation.
and nuclear annihilation, and it is what it is. But that all that stuff goes hand in hand, and it's all fascinating that we essentially went 100 years in technology pretty much overnight within a few years. And like you said earlier, man, it's hard to tell what we have now.
And if you could just imagine if we were kept at this rate of this technology, I mean, like new gadgets literally coming out every single day. If what we did in these last 100 years, or let's just say even the last 50 years, I mean, this is the year, 50th anniversary of the moonwalk. I mean, what's to come in 50 more years, or say another 150 years? I just can't even imagine what the world will look like. Here's an interesting question for you. This comes from Debunker Buster. Does he know of any evidence that, I lost it, that some UFOs are time travelers?
Well, there's a lot of talk of that. I don't know if you guys keep up with it. There's a lot of, of course you can't, guys, don't believe everything you see on the internet, but there's a lot of stories and accounts out there where you'll see these really old pictures of people, and then you'll see what looks like a guy standing there holding a cell phone in his hand.
Yes.
Now, whether that's photoshopped or CG, I don't know. But there's some that claim to have been, claim to have been tested and shown as being a real picture. There's people out there right now that say they are a time traveler and they've come back in time to warn us or whatever the case. When you see these accounts, almost immediately it seems like they're shut down and they're covered up and stuff like that. But, you got to have an open mind and think that everything is possible,
Two things I want to say. First of all, you mentioned the pictures, right? One of the pictures that people cannot say is fake is in the Charlie Chaplin film. I don't know where they were filming. I think probably Los Angeles, Hollywood, right? And in the scene, you have a woman that's walking in the background, and she looks like she's holding a darn cell phone. And so the fact that this is in the film, really, you can't say that was photoshopped after the time. I mean, it's been in the film archives for almost a century at this point, from Charlie Chaplin's work of the silent era. So, and also another thing with time travel, and I'm sure you've known this, Dave, that if you can affect a gravitational change, right, if you can create your own gravity, well then by definition you can create cloaking devices. You can bend space-time and go through other dimensions, aka wormholes, and therefore every spacecraft is hence a time machine. So you have to have an open mind, like you said.
Well, they've already proven, recently that there are other dimensions. They've proven it now.
Yes.
So if there are other dimensions, what's to say there's not intelligent beings in those dimensions that know how to manipulate time and space? I mean, it's really fascinating stuff.
Now, let's go to some of your own investigations. What would you say your top 3 cases that you've investigated, whether it be UFOs, paranormal, Bigfoot, time travel, that you yourself have investigated? What cases would they be?
Oh, man, there's so many. I've done so many over the years, but, I say some of the ones that really are, have been both unnerving and eye-opening to me are those times when something unseen has reached out and really like attacked me or, touched me or things of that nature. Me and my good buddy David Weatherly, author of The Black-Eyed Kids and many other.
Great guy. I've known him. He's been on the show a few times.
Yeah, we've investigated, quite often together. We do a lot of work together, and we actually formed the Society of the Supernatural a few years ago together, and we have a select group of folks that are just go-getters and very well-known people in all the genres of the paranormal. And we were at this location, which was an old brothel up in Indiana that was ran by the mob, the Chicago mob, and the whole plan was for us to stay there for an entire week, and we were going to be there all by ourselves. But the first day and night we were there, we were doing like a little charity event for the owner and stuff for a local area, and it was raising food for the food bank. So we did a little event where we had people come in, buy tickets, and we gave our lecture and our presentations and stuff, and then we let them investigate the hotel with us, the old brothel. Well, we had, most of them had sat down and they were watching a live feed that we had set up, and me and him were up in the upstairs area. And he was in this big bathroom, and I was running the camera for him, and he was holding the ghost box. And the ghost box was getting a lot of negative responses and stuff. And I took a piece of equipment in there, set down next to him, a static meter, to try to, you want to try to get the device to light up at the same time. So I bent over to set this piece of equipment down, and I felt this wave of energy just hit me, and I stumbled backwards. It really shocked me and threw me for a loop for a second. And he had the ghost box running, and it was kind of loud, and he looked at me, he goes, "What happened?" I said, "I don't know, something just went right through me." And he's like, "You don't look right." And he goes, "You better go sit down, man." And I said, "All right." So I kind of went back behind the camera, and I pulled up a chair and was watching, still filming him on the camera and whatnot. And I kept feeling a tickling sensation on my head, and I was like, man, and I was feeling real dizzy and nauseated. And so he gets on the ghost box and he said, "What'd you do today?" And this groggly voice comes over it and says, "I hit him," ha ha ha, just like that.
Wow.
And he said, "What'd you hit him with?" And it said, "A shovel." So, and long story short, there was a lot of negative stuff coming out of the box talking about it was going to kill us and hurt us and la 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 la. So we just shut it down. When it gets that negative, we just shut it down for a while and regroup and whatever. So we went back downstairs where everybody was watching the live feed we had set up. And they're like, "Man, that was crazy," and stuff. And I was like, and they're like, "Man, you don't look right." And I sat down there with everybody, and I felt that tickling sensation on my head again. And I reached up with my hand and felt my head, and I had a big knot on my head, and I was bleeding. And everybody saw it.
Literally. It's like you had the effect of being hit by a shovel.
Yes. And not only that, I had the physical marks from it. And I had a knot on my head with a little cut on it, like somebody whacked me in the head with a shovel. And, when you realize that something is strong enough to punch through our world from that world and physically harm you, it's a little bit unnerving, because you're like, wow, it just reaffirms everything for me that, hey, this stuff is real. There's stuff out there we don't understand, and it can affect you physically, mentally, and spiritually.
Very much so. Before I get to the next case, and that would be one hell of a case that I think if that happened to me, Dave, I would probably be scared every time.
A lot more happened there, too. Weatherly was attacked the next day by the same entity with the same voice on the box. It scratched him from the top of his shoulder all the way down past his belt line. I mean, and it told him before it was going to do it. It said, "I'm going to slice you," or whatever. And sure enough, within minutes, he said, "Man, my back's on fire." And he had a long sleeve shirt on with a T-shirt over top of that tucked into his pants. And he was on camera the whole time, and we pulled his shirt up, and it was just 3 blood red scratches, just ready to bleed. And he became nauseated right after that. And, again, this nasty, and this ghost or spirit was calling himself Ian. And, from the get-go, it was saying negative things about it didn't like cops and pigs and all that stuff. Of course, me being a retired law enforcement, it all goes hand in hand. If it was ran by the mob, of course they don't like anybody to do with law enforcement, and they attacked us.
So it goes to show that some of these mobsters, that their energy that they spent in this brothel was probably left over, or that they haven't moved on, if that's where their energy still is.
And they're intelligent, and they can communicate, so...
Before we get on to another case, Debunker Buster has a couple more questions. Let me read them word for word. Has he ever heard theories that reincarnation and the afterlife life review is a trap? That when you die, you should not go into the light?
Never heard it put quite that way before, but that's an interesting take, you know. I guess it would depend on what your religious background and belief is, you know. Um, that's all, you know, anything's a possibility in this. Of course, none of us know that, and that would be, you know, is it a trap? Do you go into the light and your energy is trapped forever, or do you not go into the light and you're stuck on this plane, on this earth, doing whatever?
As a ghost for centuries.
It makes sense. Yeah, why do some spirits linger and some do not? That's great. That's a great question. That's one of the things that, you know, you can literally spend your entire life in one aspect or one genre of the paranormal and never get any answers, you know, and there's so many different genres per se and different aspects you can research and investigate out there. I mean, you know, that's why I think it's great that so many people are more open-minded about it now, and they're looking at different aspects and different theories and different things. I think it's helping the field tremendously by having this many people more open, you know, to it and looking into it and researching and investigating it.
Before I ask this other question, I'm going to just piggyback of what you said, Dave. It's imposter syndrome, meaning that the further we go down the rabbit hole, the more that we seem to have known and learned about all these cases, the more questions we have. And
oh, yeah.
So, as a matter of fact, years may have gone by and we've been investigating, studying, and researching, and yet we are even more lost now than then. And I fully agree that's the case.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's never been an investigation I've done where I've come out and said, okay, I got all the answers to that. It's always more questions, you know. So you might find maybe a little piece of that puzzle of that particular case or whatever's transpiring there, but you're always left with even more questions. It's just a never-ending saga or battle per se, you know. It just never. And then some of these locations and these places have so many different layers of history. I mean, you could spend a lifetime on that one particular location and whatnot, and that's it, you know, and never get any further.
Yeah.
And just get more and more questions, you know.
Especially the deeper you dig, and the more history it has, the more civilizations that have lived there. This is the second question from Debunker Buster. What does he think about the idea that the drug DMT allows access to interdimensional beings?
Well, you know, any kind of drug that alters your mind and perceptions, you know, as you touched on earlier in the show, the natives would often use peyote to enter the spirit world. And I think it's true with any mind-altering substance, whether it be cannabis, alcohol, anything like that opens you up to many different things. And, you know, a lot of times, you know, I tell people, you know, make sure if you're an investigator, you know, some of these groups are just, I call them paranormal enthusiasts because they'll go out and they'll party at locations and drink and whatnot, and then they go into a haunted location and they wonder why, you know, they've carried an attachment home with them. Well, that's why, because you know, when you lower your protections and your inhibitions by using substances, so to speak, you are risking even more of being carrying home an attachment or things negative, even negative things happening to you after some of these investigations and stuff. And I've seen it over and over again, for many years in the paranormal fields. People go out, they party, they go investigate, and next thing you know, their life's turned upside down because they've got some kind of negative attachment on them. So yeah, I think it's definitely possible that any drug, including the DMT or whatever the case, will may indeed open you up to many different things.
I agree with you, Dave, for quite a lot of reasons. I've actually seen it myself where, like you said, people will go out, say they want to go for Dr. Greer's CE5, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, meaning that you are human-initiated contact. Well, if they're partying up a storm and they're on sacred land such as Joshua Tree, where the Native Americans buried a lot of their people, and there's supposed to be a lot of activity. Well, then, as Father Jack Ashcraft put it, that, like you said, lowers your inhibitions, and you're open and susceptible to take home an attachment, a non-terrestrial attachment, whether it be, as you said, you didn't want to use the word demonic, but a negative spirit that can come into you and affect your life adversely all throughout the rest of your life. And sometimes it requires an exorcism to actually have it removed from your life.
Absolutely, and I've seen it happen to many people over the years, and you'll hear and you'll read about horror stories from people, that have had. It's dangerous enough in some aspects to do it without having mind-altering substances in your body. You know what I mean? So, yeah, if you're an investigator and you do this type of thing, and especially if you're new to it, I highly recommend to not do that.
I agree with you. As a matter of fact, some people who do lead these groups actually require that everybody don't participate or partake in anything, even something like caffeine, for instance, anything of that nature. Even that, which is everybody normal, having a cup of coffee or a cup of green tea. But even to that can affect you, which is why, and this is going to change the direction of the conversation a little bit, I've heard from a lot of researchers that this is one of the reasons why children are primarily the reason that extraterrestrials, they start abducting them, because they are unaffected by drugs or caffeine or anything else like that they're more pure. And because if you have done any of these drugs, or even if you have a dependency to caffeine, that it's harder for them to have telepathic influence over you, and therefore telepathic control. And I've heard that multiple times. Have you ever come across that?
Yeah, I've heard of instances such as that. I've heard reports of that very thing you just talked about. And also, when it comes to hauntings as well, a lot of children are unpolluted. They are innocent, so to speak, and they are able to see and interact with spirits, so to speak, a lot more readily than an adult human is. Because they're unpolluted, they're open,
pure,
they're closer to the spirit world, and they're more pure than we are. So yeah, I definitely agree with that 100%. How many children have you ever heard of that have imaginary friends?
A lot.
It's a lot of them. And, you'll see, even my daughter, she'll talk and play like she's talking to somebody, and all the time. Now, whether that's, in her little made-up world and her playing and how she interacts, but there's numerous, almost all little kids have an imaginary friend, or two or three. So what is that? Is that them interacting with a spirit, so to speak, or something else? We don't know.
Or an extraterrestrial. I've seen that actually happen with some of my own friends when they were children. At 4 years old, I believe they're twins, and they said that 3 gray-headed beings with a one-piece black suit came in the room, and they were just sort of happy, like, "Oh, hey, you're here." No fear, nothing like that of the sort. I just thought it was very, very, very interesting. Now, speaking on alien abductions, since you do cover all cases of paranormal, what have you seen? Have you talked to any abduction or abductees in your area over the years? I would think so.
Yeah, I have a few actually, and I actually have some new cases coming to me from a good friend of mine who anything in West Virginia that he gets, he turns over to me. So yeah, I have dealt with some and interviewed some, and these are people from all walks of life who are doctors, lawyers, teachers that I don't feel would be making up this type of thing just per se because of their background and what they do and who they are. And there's, thousands and thousands of people that claim to have been abducted, and some cases are more extreme than others. Some say that, they don't remember most of it. Some say that they have been taken up into craft and taken into space, and taken all over various different areas in space. Of course, you have the whole horrible stories of testing being done on humans and whatnot, like that. And these people, are left with bodily scars. And some of the ones I've talked to recently have shown me very strange markings and scars on their bodies that, if someone would do that to themselves, they definitely have a mental disorder, and these are people that are high members of society, like I said, doctors, lawyers, police officers, you name it. And I don't think they're making it up.
No, and you mentioned the reason why before, because of their jobs and their status in society. They have so much to lose if they were to come up with something like that. That would be a lie, and that's why I think that the higher prestige they have, like these 5 police officers or rangers that you mentioned earlier that drew upon this Bigfoot, they would not be telling this story if it was a figment of their imagination, because they would have been fired in a heartbeat.
Absolutely. And, I actually, 2 of the 5 gave me their names and their ranks and everything. It's in the book. You can check it out if you want, So, for them to go out on a limb like that and put who they are and their actual real names, that's telling me something right there. They know they saw something, they encountered something that they can't explain. And same goes with these abductions. I mean, these people are terrified and they want answers as what the heck is going on and what happened to them,
Now, we've actually talked about the being at Flatwoods. We talked about grays briefly. I mentioned those weird 2-legged creatures with just a head here in California. Can you talk about some other extraterrestrial beings that people have accounts of seeing? Mothman was another one, for instance, that you mentioned.
Yeah, Mothman is an interesting creature. It's a flying humanoid type creature. Many feel it's demonic or negative in nature because of the presence of it, But also on the flip side of that, many think it serves as a warning. Hey, I'm here. Something bad's going to happen. Prepare yourselves, or something to that effect. So, and see, during the whole Mothman sightings, there was just untold amounts of strange lights in the sky, UFOs being reported left and right in the whole area of Point Pleasant and across the river in Ohio. And not only the Mothman, you have right there on the Ohio, right where Point Pleasant is, you have 2 major rivers that converge right there. The Kanawha River out of West Virginia and runs into the mighty Ohio River. And that whole area, again, huge Native American area, but it was also considered taboo by the more current tribes like the Shawnee and stuff, because you have the whole story of Chief Cornstalk there that supposedly put a curse on the whole Ohio River Valley after he, right before he was murdered. So, again, you have that connection. Is Mothman an ET? We don't know. Is it some kind of interdimensional being that is let loose right before a disaster happens to warn people? We don't know. It's another one of those questions. What are these creatures that are being seen all over the world? Are they ETs? Are they, what are they?
Ghosts, lost cryptozoology beings that we have identified that live amongst us. That's right. There's so many.
Some kind of elemental creature, protectors of the earth, that are set out on the loose before something happens. It's all fascinating. It's all relevant. But again, the Mothman sightings happen along with UFOs in the sky all over the place. So you got to take a hard look at that. Same thing with a lot of these Bigfoot accounts. People see Bigfoot, then they see lights in the sky, or vice versa. So yeah, it's all interconnected.
Desert Rex has a question here. Does he see a correlation of abductions to blood type?
Well, there's a lot of talk of that. They talk about the Rh negative blood type. They talk about even A positive being some type of alien blood type, or but specifically the Rh negative blood type being that those folks are actually hybrids or some type of alien human hybrid that was put here through one of these genetic manipulations of ETs. So, and if you look at the human DNA, it has been proven that it has drastically changed from way back to now, and there's almost solid proof that our DNA has been manipulated.
And so Bob Lazar even mentions that. He said that we have undergone, I believe, 62 or 63 external corrections to make us what we are today.
Yeah, which that in itself is just fast. I mean, it's almost proof that, hey, we're being genetically manipulated by someone or something somehow. How is that happening? Is it just evolution? I don't think so.
No, I doubt it's Darwinism. It's because if it is evolution, then it's happening at a scale that's way too fast.
Unprecedented.
Exactly. Do you subscribe to the fact that we humans were created by extraterrestrials, meaning that they came here and messed with Neanderthal or Homo erectus and created what is now Homo sapien, before the 62 or 63 external corrections that Bob Lazar mentioned? Some people, for instance, mentioned the Anunnaki were the bringers of life for us.
Yeah, I think it's. I think it's. I can't say. I'm not going to go out on a limb and say without a doubt, 100%. But I think it's really eye-opening to see, and I think it's very definitely a possibility, because you can even take accounts out of the Bible. You look at the book of Ezekiel.
Yes. Ezekiel's full of references.
Yeah, to UFOs. And then some of the most famous religious paintings in the world all depict UFOs in the sky. And there's no doubt about it as to what they are. I mean, they are the classic UFO shape. They've got beams of light coming out of them. I mean, in my mind, there's no doubt about it that we've been being visited by ETs for thousands of years, and with that being said, obviously, if that's the case, it goes without question to say that, we've more than likely been manipulated, to be what we are today, if that is the case. I mean, there's just too many things that point to it, and it's so obvious right now that, you kind of, you don't want to go out on a limb and say, without a shadow of a doubt. But, I mean, man, if you sit down and take a look at it, it's overwhelming evidence, in my point of view, in my opinion.
I definitely agree with that. Now, Debunker Buster's got two more questions. First is, has he come across any reptilian abduction accounts, and if so, what does he feel their role is? And the second part is, are they subservient to insectoid beings, like Dr. David Jacobs thinks?
Well, I've talked to a few people, and, Weatherly's one of them. He's done a lot of stuff in the Southwest, especially out, in Arizona, Superstition Mountains and all that stuff out there. And I actually grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I went to school there, went all the way through high school, and, read these accounts of people just disappearing in the desert, especially in Arizona at the Superstition Mountains. Foot tracks, massive searches being put on, people seeing these reptilian-type creatures. And then you have all the accounts of these government contractors that accidentally drilled through this subterranean cavern and got into firefights with these type of creatures. So I don't know. I can't go out and say, well, they're subservient to the other beings. But when it comes to the reptilians, it would seem to me that they are very negative against the human race for whatever reason, just because of all the negative accounts out there about these things. There's accounts of them, abducting people, eating them, cutting them up, having them in vats and everything else. and all this crazy stuff. So when you liken that to maybe what the Greys or the Nordic ETs, the accounts of those, they would seem to be the more malevolent type of ETs versus the other reported races of ETs that are visiting Earth or are on Earth now as we speak.
And also, those benevolent races are always warning us about impending doom or major catastrophes to this Earth if we don't take care of it. So it seems to me that either they're looking out for us, or this is the other thing, they could not care about us at all because we may exist on another planet anyway, and it's the planet that they care more about. And if you look at it in the long run, we have only been here, it's a blink of an eye, the existence that we've had in 4.5 billion years of history. So I could definitely see why.
Look at the destruction that the humans have caused upon the Earth in a short amount of time.
Oh, yes.
And then the Native Americans talk about the ant people, the subterranean ETs that live there that liken to the insectoids and the reptilians and all that. And that whole story is pretty scary stuff to me too. So what is it? Are they just biding their time? And then there's all these talk of if you look at the Vamana stories of
yes, the Hindus, yes,
by these different extraterrestrial races fighting, where they were fighting because one race was going to wipe out the human race versus the other one said no, give them a chance, whatever. We don't know. I mean, but there's so many different accounts from all cultures and all walks of life that date back thousands of years. There's just too much to ignore that points directly to the fact that we have been being visited, and we are being visited to this day by extraterrestrial races.
And speaking of what you just mentioned, before I get to another question that I see is building up in the chat, when you were talking about the underground and people, I came across a very interesting case by Preston Dennett. He's done a lot of books, particularly the UFOs Over series, UFOs over California, UFOs over Arizona, New York, etc. In Los Angeles, in downtown in the 30s, apparently they were mining for gold, and they found a cave they were mining, and they ended up coming across these caverns that have seemed to have been here for the longest time. Well, apparently going into these caverns, they encountered these lizard people, as they called them in the 30s, who told them with no uncertain terms to get out, to stay away. And they dynamited it shut, and they built a city over it since then. So it doesn't surprise me that I would think that around the world, there's probably them lurking right underneath our feet as we speak, especially where you are.
I've got a similar one here in West Virginia. You want me to tell that story?
Absolutely.
So, as we talked about earlier, there's all these coal mines here in West Virginia, just thousands and thousands of miles of underground coal mine tunnels. Well, as in, most mines, there are disasters, and the gases underneath the earth explode and end up killing a bunch of guys, cause cave-ins and whatnot, Well, there's this one account I came across of this mine. I'm not going to tell where it's at because I'm writing about it in my book and stuff, so I want people to read it in the book, but I'll give you the general overview of it. So there was this, and this happened in the early 1900s. Big mine, lots of people got killed in a mine explosion, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the, and this is a really crazy story because it not only has what I'm about to tell you, but it also has some ghost story attached to it. So one of the miners that died in the explosion, he was one of the mine foremen. He was in charge of a crew, and his son is the one that told me this story. And his son is an old man now, or when I first got the story from him. And anyway, long story short, the mine blows up, kills, I think it was 180 guys, underground. Well, the son, the man's son that died in the mine, said that his dad began to visit him at night in his dreams as a ghost, was coming to him. and told him that it wasn't an accident, that he himself had blown up the mine, and then his dad would disappear, right? And he, for years, this haunted him. You know, his dad was coming and then told him, you know, you need to, you know, there's something else happened under there. Well, as time went on, you know, they opened the mine back up and everything, and some other guys that knew, they had to go back down there and get the bodies of the men, right? So some of the men that went down there to get the bodies of the miners, when they finally opened up the mine and got to it, you know, they had to, where the mine had collapsed from the explosion, to get to the bodies, they dug through and they were getting the bodies out, and they discovered most of the men in one area. But then there was another group of men, including the son's dad, in another area. And they had blocked up this part of the wall. And he said that when they got to the boy's dad and everything, there was like 5 guys in there. And it had appeared that they set charges and blew the mine up themselves. But then they found a corpse of this lizard being.
Wow.
Down there with them. And it looked to them like they blew up the mine to keep this thing from escaping.
To protect everybody above ground. That's a very heroic thing to do. That's a freaky story.
Yeah, and this thing, according to what the man told the guy's son, is that this thing was huge, and it was like 12 or 15 feet tall and all this stuff. And it was of course it was blown up, but they could see it had lizard-like skin with scales, and it was just a massive creature. And, those guys did it, blew the mine up basically to keep this thing from escaping. And it's a really spooky story. I mean, the whole story is really nuts.
Yeah, it sounds nuts, and I can't wait to read it when it's in your book.
Did they come across some colony of lizard people, or reptilians, as we call them, these ETs that are living underground? Are they right here in West Virginia too? Are they all over the earth? We don't know, but it seems to be very similar to the accounts told about the ones in Los Angeles.
This next question is actually just exactly on the same topic that we're talking about. Does he put any credence into other reptilian ideas like those of David Icke? Might such beings be another name for what have been called demons for so long?
Sure, why not? It could be. It's definitely possible. Anything's possible. There are accounts of those type of creatures being demonic in nature, negative in nature, eating people. Anything that eats humans, to me, would be very negative in nature.
Oh, yes. And children.
And if you even go back to the Bible and the Nephilim, they were said to be giants and vile creatures, and then you go into the accounts of these Bigfoot type creatures that are giants that would capture Native American tribe members and eat them. They were cannibals, almost to speak. But really, if they're a different being, they're not really a cannibal. They're just hunting humans. So, it almost goes to say, well, the movie Predator is almost similar to that, these creatures that are hunting humans for sport.
It's true. It's true. And it's been happening throughout history for thousands of years, what it looks like. And that's the scary part, too, of it. And actually not too scary, the fact that it seems to me that our older civilizations much respected this. And I know I said this earlier on the show, but I'm going back thousands of years because it seemed, can you imagine if the Library of Alexandria was not demolished at the time that it was? What secrets were lost of mankind 2,000 years ago?
Yeah.
You look at hieroglyphics that show what looks like a helicopter, submarine, or in Spain, that statue that's 500 years old that looks like someone in a spacesuit. Same thing in the Mayan cultures. What were they seeing is the big question. That's a huge mystery in itself.
Absolutely. I mean, they drew and sculpted what they saw. There was no in between. I don't think they made up, because there's too many, drawings, paintings, and sculptures all around the world that are so similar in nature. And, you're talking about cultures that are hundreds, if not thousands of years apart.
That's right.
And thousands of miles apart, for that matter, it's just, there's too many things that point to, hey, we've been being visited for a long, long time.
Oh, even comparing Egypt to the Mayans, right? You have the temples,
Yep.
you have the similar stories, and yet you have no evidence that humanity at any point crossed the Pacific Ocean to get to, not Pacific, the Atlantic Ocean, to get to where the Mayans lived. So
right.
What's the best explanation? Occam's razor. Well, instead of that, they both just imagined in their eyes or dreams that they were being visited and given intelligence and life and everything else from the gods above and have similar structures. Well, then the best, the easiest account to accept is the fact that they were in fact visited.
Look at the Nazca lines and look at the alignment of the both pyramids in the Mayan ruins and in Egypt. They all line up perfectly to Orion's belt. There's no coincidence in that.
Speaking of Nazca lines, I just did a recent story, and this was shocking me to my core when I found it. The Cousins brothers, Third Phase of the Moon, they have one of the largest UFO YouTube channel, and they're in Hawaii. They uncovered what could be considered like equivalent to Nazca lines in Hawaii, yet they're just they seem to be like a compass. But here's the weird thing. When you take these lines and you follow them to eternity, to where they hit other parts of this world, they all hit ancient ports. And some of them are so precise. They're one island, I believe it's called Buster Island. It's only 7 miles long. If one of these lines that hit it, if it was just a fraction of a degree to a different direction, well, it would bypass that, considering it was 1,700 miles away or something over 1,000 miles away. And also, here in America, one researcher found that in Texas, when he came to research the Marfa lights, he did find lines that would be akin to the Nazca lines. Now, prior to manned flight, what reason would you have to draw anything in the ground that can only be visible from the sky?
Absolutely. You were trying to signal aircraft that were coming in.
That's
hey,
right.
I'm here. This is where you go. And that's the only means they had to do it besides fire, and smoke.
Yep.
So, and those things are massive in structure, and, the best way to see them is from the air, and they were there to be seen from the air.
And they weren't found until we flew over them.
Absolutely, yep.
Okay,
so,
here's another...
how many structures do you see that they haven't even been able to get to in South America yet because the jungle is so thick and overgrown? But you can still, they've taken pictures of these things from aircraft, and they're sticking out of the jungle canopy. There's untold amounts of pyramids and stuff that have never been explored yet.
Oh, I imagine that in the next couple hundred years, and because archaeologists are still having a field day, just right, like as you mentioned, in that area in South America, they're finding new pyramids and new burial grounds and new chambers with these pyramids, the different things that I think we're going to be hearing about this for a long time, new discoveries. And underwater. That's another amazing thing, pyramids underwater. So that also begs the question, is the time that between the Ice Age and now, when the water level was lower, how many pyramids are found underwater? I know, of course, some in Japan, some recently, Linda Moulton Howe mentioned about in Alaska that are clearly underwater. So again, that's a whole other area. Okay, here is another question. Has he heard of any accounts of ETs from the oceans?
Oh, yeah. There's all kind of USO reports. craft coming out of the ocean, military ships monitoring craft at just unknown speeds, impossible speeds, and anything that any modern military has. I mean, they recorded some of these craft going underwater at 200 miles an hour, I think one report was. I mean, there's nothing known to man that can travel underwater that fast.
Well, the only way it would be able to happen, because the water resistance is so strong, you cannot go that fast unless if you're enveloped in a gravitational field.
Yep. I mean, there's so many accounts from the U.S. military, from Russian military, of their ships tracking these craft underwater, for miles, and these things cruising at ungodly speeds and then just popping up on the surface and zoom, they're gone out into space, just in a blink of an eye. So I don't think we have anything like that. It would be a far stretch to even say we have anything remotely close to something like that.
Especially, as you mentioned, the fact that they're not just USOs, because they become UFOs the moment they leave the water. So if they're going from the bottom of the underneath the ocean or underwater a couple hundred miles per hour, and then just get up and in a blink of an eye they're out of this atmosphere, well then, folks, that's a hell of a wake-up call that we got to start paying attention.
I mean, even Columbus documented an account when he was coming across the Atlantic of a UFO coming out of the water.
Yes.
So these accounts go back hundreds of years, of mariners seeing strange craft emerge from the ocean and shooting off into space.
And even what you mentioned about Columbus, this literally happened, I believe, 2 or 3 days before he founded the Americas. It's almost as if like the UFO or USO that he had found was sort of tracking him. Now this to me opens up a whole other idea. You mentioned how that we have for thousands of years there is evidence in the Bible. We have those very famous paintings in the clear background. You see, like, for instance, a disc and a tiny figure with one hand over his head, like he has a visor with another hand pointed in the sky. What if, in fact, these are time travelers that are only observing us now? And once you open that idea up, well, then the paradoxes really start to come out, and it's like, whoa, wait a minute, which one is it? But what if it's both?
Right. I mean, you would have to venture to guess that if they are indeed time travelers, where did they get this technology from? Did we finally, at some point in the distant past, meet the ETs and they felt safe enough to give us this technology, and then they come back in time to warn us, hey, you need to do stuff this way, that way, and then we will give to you this technology to use. What is it? It's craziness. You can just get into so many different ways to run with this stuff. It's crazy.
I've actually heard something really interesting, is that we cannot go back in time. For instance, if once we create a time machine or the ability to travel into time, we could only go back to the time that the time machine was built or put in that location. Now, what you just mentioned is, what if these ETs with their Vimanas or whatever ancient craft, which was traveling via gravity, hence are in fact also time travel machines at the same time. If they've been here for thousands of years, well, that means that they've been able to come as they want from all those times. So I think that just as you mentioned, this literally can open up so many roads that you want to go to. And this goes back to what we were saying earlier. The further down the rabbit hole, the more facts we seem to have, the bigger the mystery seems to get, and the more questions.
Absolutely. More questions.
That's true. Now we have a little bit, about 10 minutes a little over 10 minutes left before I want to have you plug in your book and your website and anything else you're working on. Let's talk about some other cases that you think is relevant for people to hear about.
Well, I mean, it fascinates me to this day when I go to any given location and I can walk in the room with a recorder and I can ask a question, and I know I'm the only person in that location, or me and my partner or whoever I'm happen to be with, and we're standing right next to each other, and I happen to ask a question and I play that recorder back and I get an intelligent response. I mean, that blows my mind to this day. When you can document stuff of that nature, how do you explain that? It's real, it's right there. I think there's spirits all around us all the time, whether they be human spirits, ETs, or some type of entity, or all the above. I mean, it's a fascinating thing to me, and that's why I do what I do.
What are some of the questions that you've asked that, to your mind, stick out as the most frightening or most intelligent because of the fact that you could also say that this is tangible evidence. You're not able to hold it, but the fact that it's recording something right there, that's huge.
Yeah. I'll give you an example of that. Okay, there's a location here in West Virginia that's very famous, well known. It's called Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. Okay, this place is the second largest hand-cut stone building in the world. The only one bigger is the Kremlin in Moscow. And thousands upon thousands of people died in this place, over its long and sordid history of mental illness and whatnot. So I'm in this place, back in the day before the new owners took it over, I could literally walk in there at will and investigate because I knew who ran it and everything. And now it's privately owned, so you can't, you have to either pay or whatever, or do a public event there. So I was in there at this one particular time, and there was no one else in the building. And this building is huge, and we're just asking questions and stuff, not really getting much response. But with my own ears, I hear a man's voice scream out and say, "Let me out of here," like it's some guy in a straitjacket.
Yeah.
And and then we caught it on the recorder, So when you get stuff like that, I mean, and then you can go into this place, and I kid you not, it could be 95 degrees outside in the middle of summer, and you walk into this place and you have to wear a jacket because the spirit energy is so
cold,
heavy, and so full of freezing cold in this place. And there's other locations like that too that I've been to, where it's colder than cold in there. And, you can physically document it with various devices like a thermometer or a recorder, and you get these crazy EMF fluctuations when for a fact there's no power of any kind inside the building. You can document these things. And when you get all those things put together at once, then you can take a hard look and say, hey, we had this, and this going on. We recorded, several EVPs of responses that were intelligent in nature to our questions, and we had this piece of equipment going off and this piece of, and you take all that and put it together. I mean, you've got some pretty relevant stuff going on there that you can't explain rationally or scientifically, per se. And, it's the paranormal, it's the unexplained, and it's fascinating stuff to me.
Do you have any idea from your own theories of why it's, these ghosts or spirits of the dead seem to emanate this cold, thick, heavy air like you mentioned? Because that's the one very consistent thing I've heard, whether it be people walking into a room, like you said, 95 degrees outside, and inside you need a jacket. Or as someone may be standing and maybe a ghost passes through them and that temperature literally drops 5-10 degrees in a split second. How do you explain those things? Have you come across any ideas of why?
Well, some of the theories out there say when these spirits or entities, whatever they may be, are manifesting, that they create that cold spot because of the energy displacement, that the energy it takes for them to manifest, it actually changes the environment, and makes it. I mean, it's not only cold spots. There's also hot spots that I've documented too when these things are happening.
Interesting.
So, what it is, I don't know, but it's that energy displacement, I think, that creates almost like a mini wormhole or a portal, possibly to the. I mean, to me, it would be to another dimension because these things are coming through from not our reality, but another reality. And you can physically interact with some of them sometimes. Sometimes they're more of a residual event, something like a record that plays over and over. Sometimes they're intelligent in nature and you can interact with them. So it's fascinating stuff, especially when you get a bunch of different things going on at once, you really got to take a hard look at that. Say, yeah, man, that we had this, and this going down, and we documented it all, and you can't explain that scientifically.
Let's see here. Debunker Buster says he has one last follow up on reptilians he posted above. If he wants to ask it, let me see. I think we did ask it. I'll re-ask it again. It's the same question. He goes, does he think reptilian shapeshifter stories are referencing an energetic phenomenon taken over people like possession, or are we talking physical shapeshifters, reptilians, or otherwise? By the way, that's a new question, so thank you, Debunker Buster. I didn't even see that one there. Do you want me to repeat it? Did you get that part?
Yeah, I believe I got it. Well, shapeshifters, stem from Native American folklore and stories, and beings that can literally take shape of anything they want, really, whether it be another animal or some type of entity, if you will, which is the whole shapeshifter stories to me are terrifying in some aspects, because if something is likened to a witch or whatever, and they can change their shape and turn into anything they want, and a lot of those stories are very negative. They come to take people's souls and all this crazy stuff. So yeah, it's pretty spooky stuff.
To me, that's actually the scariest is our shapeshifters, because what if they disguise themselves as, say, the ghost of your grandfather, and then you go up to it thinking it's a benevolent being, and then all of a sudden it changes into something vile and disgusting and just wants to take you wherever it came from.
Right. Suck your energy and suck your drive. And then you got, the German aspect of the same thing as a doppelganger.
Yes.
And those are always said to be, if you see the doppelganger, it's said that means you're going to die if you see yourself as a doppelganger. It's likened to the whole negative demonic type stuff where, you see an entity that took your shape or form, then it's a bringer of bad news that someone's going to die, or even yourself is going to die. So, again, different cultures with very similar in nature stories.
Yes, and that's the one thing that does not change, is like you said, and it stands the test of time, is having different cultures with this. I really almost identical stories that from different locations of the world and different periods of time throughout history. A couple more quick questions. You did mention the two Bigfoot sightings that you had, and also the Bigfoot and the ghost sighting when you were young. Have you ever seen a UFO, meaning, of course, I'm sure you've seen things unidentified, but maybe something low that looks like a traditional, either a triangle or a saucer or a Saturn shape or anything like that?
Yeah, I have. I've seen a couple, actually. I saw one in Arizona while I was in the Air Force out at my friend of mine had just built a new house on the outskirts of Tucson when I was stationed there at Davis Mountain, and we all witnessed an oval-shaped craft. We were having a barbecue in his backyard. His house was one of the first ones, so there wasn't anyone. There was only like 2 or 3 families in this subdivision that were being built, and his backyard was the desert pretty much. And one of the guys said, "What the crap is that?" and pointed up, and we all witnessed this oval shape hovering. And it was pretty high in the sky, so it was probably the size, to us it looked like the size of a baseball.
Wow.
So it was several thousand feet in the air. We watched this thing hover and come in a downward motion and then come to a complete stop. We watched it for, I don't know, a good minute or two, and then shoot, it shot straight up into space.
And that, again, goes against everything that our known physics say.
No sound, no anything. No blinking normal aircraft lights, just a yellowish white oval shape. And then I saw a similar craft here in West Virginia in 2012. I had a fire, and in the evenings in the summer I like to have a fire, and I'll sit out and watch the sky and relax, And I had gotten up to put some more wood on the fire, and I turned around for no good reason, just to turn around, and I see this craft coming across the horizon, very similar to that one. It was oval shaped, yellowish white in color, pearly looking kind of. When I saw it, I immediately ran to my truck, which was about 10 yards away, because I wanted to get my 1,000-power binoculars and get a look at this thing. And as I was retrieving my binoculars out of the truck, my wife at the time said, it just made a 45-degree turn. And within a matter of like 3 seconds, it was from one hot horizon directly over our head. And by the time I got my binoculars on this thing, it was hovering above our heads. And it was about the size of what a paper plate would be in the sky, which, was several thousand feet in the air. And there was no sound. And something moving that fast would have broke the sound barrier and made a loud boom, because it literally covered from one horizon to over our head in about 3 seconds, 4 seconds maybe. And then I got my binoculars up on it good, and then it shot straight up into space as well. No sound, no nothing.
Again, if it has no sound and it's going that fast and it doesn't create a sound boom, a sonic boom, well, then obviously that again shows that this is not using our traditional physics of aerodynamics. Clearly that some other technologies are at work, and the one that seems to be the most consistent is the fact that they are creating their own gravity, because if that's the case, then you can go that fast.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen some other strange stuff in the sky too, definitely UFOs, but I can't say that I think they're ET for sure. But I saw one night, I was up late riding, and I had to go out of my truck, retrieve something out of my truck, and I looked up and I saw a diamond shape, something, but I thought, well, maybe, and it was fairly far off, so I thought, well, maybe that's a satellite and it's just reflecting off the sun, off of the big arms that they put out for solar power. Mm-hmm. So I ran back into the house and got my camera, and I started filming this thing, and I zoomed in on it, and it was definitely diamond shaped and stuff. And my battery on my camera started running out, so I ran in the house to grab another battery and my 1,000-power binoculars again. And when I came out, it was gone. So I knew then there was no satellite. And, I didn't get any more on camera. I got about 30 seconds of film on it. So, I actually put that on. It's on my YouTube channel on Real Supernatural. You can check it out.
Yeah, the fact that the diamond shape, that reminds me of, I think it was in Texas, that case where these two older ladies and one of their grandsons had seen this diamond-shaped craft and were burned by radiation burns on their face, so much so they were blinded.
They were up close on that thing. They were right up on it.
Yeah. Anyhow, we've gone over the time, and it has been, this time, I have to say, really almost 2 hours sped by, Dave, because you've been such a fantastic guest. Before we go real quick, I want to ask you, if you have a final statement for everybody, what would you say? And then, of course, I want you to plug in your books or a website, anything else you want.
Yeah, just, I often tell people, keep your eyes open and get your head out of your cell phones and observe your environment, because you never know what you'll see. My website. Also, there's a new video coming to my Real Supernatural channel on YouTube of a new location I just did called the William Heyman House in Sutton, West Virginia. So look for that this weekend, a new location that I just investigated. It was a pretty awesome place. My website is www.davespinks.paranormalinvestigator.com. You can see a lot of the events I'll be speaking at coming up this year. You can check out the Society of the Supernatural page with me and David Weatherly and Rosemary Ellen Guiley and Eric Altman, Kristen Lee, Barry Gaunt, and Ross Allison. All of us are members on there. There's links to all their stuff. And my new book, Real West Virginia Hauntings, Volume 1, is due to release anytime now. And this Monday night, I will be on Travel Channel, 9 p.m., and you can check out a story that came out of my new book on the show Paranormal 911 called, it's going to be about an inmate that I had a crazy experience with that died when I was still in law enforcement. So you can check that story out on Paranormal 911 this Monday, 9 p.m. Eastern Time.
Well, I'm definitely going to DVR that for sure. That's for darn sure. I know you've had a few appearances on that and other paranormal shows. It's been a wonderful time speaking to you. Let me give some shout outs real quick. First of all, the owner of UPRN, Joe Montaldo, and all those listening off 107.7 FM New Orleans, Louisiana. I want to thank you, as well as JC of Deprogrammed Radio in the UK. Also, iHeartMedia for carrying a show on the paranormal, which seems to be making headway, finally getting into the mainstream. So normally this would not be covered on iHeartMedia, even though Coast to Coast is, but it seems to be like they're finally starting to accept more of what we normally would be called fringe in the past, but now we're able to openly talk about this. Also, we have Pam Vrettenberg, my social media manager, and her website, UnitedTruthSeekers.com, as well as Josh Cheris, who is my assistant producer and also assistant in so many other things. And as I mentioned, my guest tonight, Dave Spinks, big thanks to you once again. It's truly been a fantastic time. And I want to tell all the listeners, I want to thank you all. This show is for you folks, for you fine people. I encourage you all to keep participating and to keep listening, and thank you all for those who did ask your questions, for being engaged. I appreciate that, and I know Dave appreciates that, because it shows that you guys are in fact paying attention. And remember, folks, as Dave just mentioned, keeping your eyes in the sky, I say disclosure is in your hands, folks. Don't just be passive listeners. Be active. Take what you've learned. If you have books, if you get Dave's books, you may want to share it to someone, or have someone that's not believing in the paranormal or UFOs or Bigfoot or ghosts, and have them sit with you while they watch something, or watch the Travel Channel episode that Dave's going to be on Monday. Things like that you can all do. And in fact, I was a passive researcher until I decided to take a more active role. And this is what it brought me to. And so everybody has traits out there and what you're good at, what you can help in the world with. And that's what's needed for us to get to the next level, where we could finally blow the lid off of all this. With that being said, folks, I'm Dr. J, host of Dr. J Radio Live. And we'll see you all Thursday night, same time, same place.